Hello again, I'm back with day 14 of My Primal Christmas and part 2 of the Big Fat Talk. Yesterday I introduced you to dietary fats and what they are, where they're from, and are they good or bad. Now today I am going to be talking about the consumption of carbohydrates and fat and why. Yesterday I made a disclaimer to say that I'm not advising you increase your fat intake if you are not eliminating grains, legumes and sugar from your diet. So I'm going to talk about why I made that disclaimer, why you cannot have a high carb, high fat diet, and what happens in your body when you eat that way. Also what happens in your body when you eat the more conventional high carb, low fat, and what happens in my body when I eat the way that I do, which is high fat and low carb. So first, let's talk about what happens in your body when you consume a carbohydrate. Carbohydrates, no matter where you're getting them from, whether it is from something that is grain-based, sugar-based, whether they're whole grains or natural sugars, from fruit or vegetables, carbohydrates, when you ingest them, they are broken down into their components. So for a fruit, for example, would be broken down into the vitamins and the minerals or the antioxidants that it contains. And one component of that is glucose. So this glucose is sent out throughout our body, through our stomach and small intestines into our bloodstream to replenish our energy levels. Glucose is actually quite harmful to us if it is in our blood for too long. So our body combats this by the pancreas releasing insulin. Now insulin has a huge part to play in your overall health, your body composition. There are far more things than you realize that insulin has an effect on. It is the master hormone. So insulin's role in this case is to gather up all the glucose. So it's a transport hormone, so to speak. So the insulin mops up all the glucose and is putting it away in the cells that need energy or wherever it can put it, basically. It needs to get rid of it. Glucose can be stored in our muscle cells and liver cells as glycogen. But if these stores are all full, then the glucose is converted into triglycerides and stored in the fat cells in our body. Because glucose is harmful to us in our blood for prolonged periods of time, it is always the component that is used first. So if you are eating fat in conjunction with these carbohydrates, all that fat is going to do is be stored because there's plenty of energy to go around with all the glucose floating around. The muscle cells are full, the liver cells are full, and there's really nowhere else for the fat to go but straight to the fat cells. So this is what happens when you eat carbohydrates and fat. The fat that you eat in conjunction with a carbohydrate is not going to be as beneficial to your body as if you were to eat just the source of fat without the source of carbs. So next is the conventional wisdom favorite. High carbohydrate, low fat. So eating meal after meal of excessive amounts of carbohydrate is going to exhaust the insulin response and cause an insulin glucose roller coaster in your body. So it's not the body composition aspect that we're looking at when we look at high carb, low fat, because many people can have amazing physiques on this diet. It's this excessive insulin response that can cause insulin resistance, and this insulin resistance has just a waterfall effect of problems. Not just to do with diabetes, which is the big one that people think of when they think of insulin, but also to do with your immune function, your energy levels, and your hormone and reproductive systems. At least you don't have to worry about the excess fat being stored as fat. But as I mentioned earlier, excess carbohydrates, if you're not using it all, it is going to be stored as fat anyway. Okay, so now let's talk about the last option. High fat, low carbohydrate. This is the way that I eat. I am what they call fat adapted. I mentioned this in the previous video. This is when you use fat that you either ingest or have stored as your primary fuel source. So what happens in my body when I eat a meal? Of course, these meals do contain carbohydrates. They're in vegetables, they're in fruits, they're in seeds and nuts, and I still eat plenty of those. I don't measure my carbohydrate intake on a day-to-day basis. The only time I would measure it is if I was making special efforts to get into nutritional ketosis. I eat my meal, which is mostly comprised of fat. Fat is the most calorically dense thing that we eat, so it has more than twice the amount of calories per gram than carbohydrates and protein does. This scares a lot of people, but for me, I think, great, so I can eat less and have more energy. So 100 grams of butter, not that I would eat butter straight, but 100 grams of butter will sustain me for longer than 100 grams of rice. It will also mean that once my body has burnt through the butter, it's in fat burning mode. I burn fat for fuel. So I don't feed my body another meal for a couple of hours, and in that time, if I need the energy, my body knows how to burn stored fat. So I go from burning butter to burning butt fat or burning stomach fat, and it's all the same in my body, and my energy levels stay the same. There is no excessive insulin response, so my blood glucose stays steady and my insulin is the same. I'm insulin sensitive, so when I do eat carbohydrates, my insulin responds quickly and efficiently. Also, when you factor in protein and muscle repair, things like this, eating high fat and low carb promotes gluconeogenesis, converting fat cells, triglycerides, into glycogen to be sent to the muscles for repair. All of these things just work in absolute harmony, eating the way that I eat. So I hope I haven't missed anything. Turns out I missed something. I forgot to mention that when locked into a high carbohydrate eating pattern, your body becomes stuck in a fat storage mode, which makes this difficult to lose excess body fat. I'm going to do a recipe next, possibly a recipe based around fats. I wanted to introduce you to the concept of fat and why I love it before I did this recipe video, so stay tuned.